Audrey, no audio. Hi, and welcome everyone to Connects Live by CX Forums. My name is Mark Michelson, and we have today's special guest, Eryc Eyl. Eryc Eyl? Eryc Eyl.
Isle, you
Sorry,
got it.
sorry,
You
I
got
got
it.
I got that wrong each time. Eryc is a business philosopher, and he's an expert on human-centric workspaces as well as how do you get people and treat people as real people. So, Eryc, welcome. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into what you're doing.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I appreciate it. I'm super excited to be here with a bunch of what I assume to be relatively like-minded folks who are at least interested in the human side of business. That's been pretty much where I've been my whole career. Though like a lot of people, I kind of stumbled into it. But I come from a background that actually is more connected to employee engagement, employee communications, organizational culture, and that sort of thing, and change management. And so I came from that background, whereas I think a lot of CX pros come from other backgrounds and then realize that change is a part of being a CX pro. I came with the change background first, so I grew up working for a General Electric company, but I've worked in tech, I've worked in consumer packaged goods, I've worked in telecom, I've worked in energy, I've worked with nonprofits, I've worked with yeah, pretty much every industry I can think of, other than oil and gas.
Huh. So I've always they say culture eats strategy for breakfast. I've heard
Mm,
that term before, and
yeah.
so I'm kind of curious how does a human centric workspace is it shaped by culture also, or
Mm.
does this space change the people? And I'll preface that with this one quote from it was Winston Churchill. He said, "We build our houses, and then we shape our houses, then they shape us."
Hmm. Hmm.
Okay, and I've seen that in retail all the time too. You set a pattern, a path. Tell me a little bit about that. Where's the tail and the dog?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to. For me, it's all about what do we mean when we say words like culture, right? And I think like we throw that word around, and different people have different definitions of what it is. For some folks, it's the I think the most famous sort of glib answer is how we do things around here, right?
Hmm.
Um, I don't actually define culture that way. I define it slightly in a more complex way, which is that culture is actually what people believe and assume is expected of them.
Hmm.
And what people believe and assume is expected of them. Most of us, barring a handful of sociopaths, want to do what's expected of us, especially at work, um, and also in society at large. But those beliefs and assumptions about what's expected of us come from what we learn and experience together over time in the organization. So to answer your question, if you're talking about sort of like a physical workspace, for example,
Hmm.
that is both that both influences culture and is an outcome of culture. How we set up a physical workplace or how we set up a hybrid workplace will certainly influence the culture, but then the culture will also influence the workplace as well, the workspace.
It's a fascinating area here when you think about you know doing CX and EX to employees,
Yeah.
right? And how do, how does what is the antidote to that? I guess or whatever.
Yeah, this is something that I feel really strongly about, Mark, and you and I've talked about this a little bit, but I begin with a really core assumption, which is that business is nothing more or less than humans serving humans. That's it, right? But it's nothing more and it's nothing less. It's really important that it's humans serving humans. And I think, I'm sure you have these conversations with clients. I certainly have these conversations all the time, which is how can we get our company to be more customer centric, right?
Mhm.
And that becomes about how do we get people to do something, which is sort of classic traditional change management, right? How do we get people to do something? But that's not how you actually get to getting people to feel authentically connected and committed to that. So to me, what I see is a lot of organizations that want to make employees be more customer centric. How do we make them be more customer centric when the fact is that that's just sort of not the right way to go about it. One of the stories that I love to tell is and some of you may have heard this one before, but large internet and telco company in South Africa who said, look, we want to become more customer centric. They were losing market share to smaller players in their market, and so rather than the usual stuff of, well, we've got a communication campaign and we'll send employees to training and we'll do all this stuff to our employees, instead they made a list of the top 99 problems that they had related to customer experience, and then they gave them to the employees and said, help us solve these, right? There's a way of actually saying, we've got 3,000 employees. They can all help us solve these problems, and by doing so, we become more customer centric. Right? We're setting that path. So I see this as really key. I think this top down. How do we make people do stuff? To be honest, I think this has in its background a mindset that is command and control, right? With maybe just a little bit of a prettier wrapper, but it's the same kind of mindset that brings us things like racism and systemic oppression and inequality, really. So I think if we can involve people in all parts of the organization, then we're going to get better results.
When you think about that, I mean, from the top down, you do have to put in place systems, and I'm talking particularly, communication channels, or deciding on, how we're going to communicate, whether it's on, especially virtual and hybrid, right? Hybrid workforce, the channel you choose, whether it's Slack or, Zoom or whatever it is, kind of shapes that interaction. It's like text always get misunderstood, right? So how do you architect that? And I know you have a 6-part framework here that maybe you can go into that a little bit, tell us some of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and thanks for asking. Yeah, and I think you're right. There are decisions that need to be made, and when I talk about employee involvement, which is one of the parts of that 6-part framework, there's no way at which all employees can be involved in all decisions all the time. That's an organization doesn't work that way. But if you want, so again, backing up to definitions, employee engagement, right? This is something that a lot of CX pros say, like, how can we get employees engaged, right? Which is another way of doing something to them. But instead, it's how do we cultivate an authentic emotional connection and commitment to what we're all here trying to do. And so that's where that sort of 6-part framework comes in. And it begins with it's 6 E's, because I'm Eryc Eyl, and I don't know. It's just easy to remember, right?
Yes.
But so it's 6 E's, and the first E is empathize, and it's really all about listening to employees.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is not where a lot of these initiatives often begin, right? We often begin with push communications and push them to training. But this starts with listening to employees, and this comes from my experience. I'll tell you just a quick story on empathize. I worked in a large telecom company that had just the worst customer satisfaction scores ever, and which is true of a lot of big telecom companies. It's not surprising, right? But my boss came to me and said, well, to fix this, Eryc, we want you to travel around to the customer service centers and deliver customer service training. And I didn't do that. Instead, what I did is I traveled around and I asked questions. I asked, like, what would good customer service look like to you? What do you need to be successful? What's getting in your way? And a lot of these folks hadn't ever been asked these questions before. They just been told to do stuff, right? And so we start with this first E, empathize, which is really the goal is to listen, to truly understand not just the average of an employee's experience like we do with a survey, but really to understand the distinct employee experiences that occur. So that's the first E, the empathize. Then the second one is encourage, and this is that involvement piece. This is really about inviting folks from within the organizations, our fellow humans, to help solve our biggest problems or to address our biggest opportunities. So that second E, encourage, that's where I gave that South African company's example. It's such a key part of starting to get employees to feel like they're part of this, and that what they're doing customer experience with you, you're not doing it to them, right? So so that's the second E, encourage. And the third E is educate. And honestly, Mark, this is one that I often I get a little edgy around even saying educate, because I think in a corporate context that can carry some baggage,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where educate is like send them to training, right? Butts in seats. Let's drill them on something, and that's not what this third E educates about at all. Instead, it's about what's the dialogic process that needs to happen so that we develop a shared understanding of what we're here to accomplish, why it matters, and what my role is in it, right? And so when we have our fellow humans all understanding what's most important, why is it important, and what's my role, then you get real power, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that's what that educate's all about. So we've got empathize, encourage, educate. The fourth E is enable. And this NECX Pro knows it's so important to, once you ask employees to do something, then you got to make sure that they have the tools, the skills, the resources that they need to do it. I talk to leaders all the time who talk about we want to raise the bar on performance, right? And that's like such a common corporate thing to say is we're going to raise the bar. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but I think when you raise the bar, you also have to raise the floor. And what I mean by that is you raise the
Mm-hmm.
floor by equipping people, right? By giving them what they need to be successful.
Right.
So fifth E is empower, and it sounds kind of like enable, but empower is really about removing roadblocks and getting things out of people's way. And one of the things that I encourage leaders to look at on this fifth E is look at your rules, your policies, your processes, and your procedures, and the ways that they have unintended consequences that are actually working against what you're there to accomplish. And this happens all the time, right? And again, to bring it back to a customer experience context, the most common form of sort of unintended consequences is, an organization will tell employees, we want you to do everything you can to help the customer.
Mm-hmm.
And we want you to keep your calls under 3 minutes and 52 seconds, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or we only want to let you approve a credit of up to $25, right? So those are the kinds of things that end up disempowering employees. And what we look at is what are the things that we can reinvent. And again, with employee input, right? If we empathize at the beginning, they're going to tell us what's getting in their way. And so in Empower, we can help clear those things out of the way. And then the last E is embrace. And this is all about like actually noticing and recognizing what people are doing, the attitudes, the mindsets, the behaviors, and the outcomes that we want. And really taking the time to notice those things, to recognize those things in a way that's personalized, in a way that's frequent, in a way that's actually relevant to our strategic goals, in a way that's specific. We tell them what exactly we're recognizing, and in a way that's timely, that happens right next to when the thing happened. So that's it. That's the whole framework of the 6 E's, and those are really together. It's not a one and done kind of process, obviously, right? It's a sort of cyclical thing that starts to create a more human-centric environment, and it's a way in which you can actually include and involve employees. And when we're trying to build more equitable workplaces, and when we're realizing that value is created when humans interact with humans, then it only makes sense to sort of make it more human-centric.
That's fantastic. I've shared his thoughts on the 6 points in the chat. If anyone wants to go there, you can copy that down. So for note taking, of course, we also record everything. Question for you about hiring to fit within a human-centric workforce. Okay, I've seen a lot of companies like Chick-fil-A. They have a certain profile of employees, right? Well, how they get the nice employees, whereas Walmart gets the grumpy ones. Okay,
Right.
Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, the old adage everybody's heard is hire the will and train the skill, right? And so when it comes to sort of customer facing employees, hiring the folks who have those human relation skills is going to be and who have the interest, I should say, in connecting with humans. That makes your job so much easier, right? What I see is organizations that hire people who are good at data entry because they're entering orders all day or whatever it is, and then you've got to train them on the human side of things, and that's a lot harder. Those skills which we call the soft skills, we all know are a lot harder.
So, how do you identify that at the hiring side? Are you involved in that at all? Do you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do, and I'm certainly no expert on that, or frankly on anything, right? But I would say that that what I see in hiring that works is, well, what doesn't work. Let's talk about what doesn't work. The traditional model of hiring, I think we can all agree, pretty well broken, right? Looking at a resume, looking at qualifications or experience or education, doing an interview or two, like that just doesn't work, right? Giving people the opportunity to do the job in controlled ways is the best way to evaluate whether they fit, right? And so this is where you can actually bring folks in, and I've seen organizations do this, where if you're hiring for a contact center, for example, uh, bring them in, sure, of course, interview them, but also let them get on the phone, let them talk to customers, see what that process is like, and that's where you can actually start to see how things pan out.
Excellent. Well, we do have a couple questions from our audience, and what we do around here is we like people to come on in the video and
Love it.
ask. So, Patty, let's get you on screen here and shoot your question up.
Hi, Eric. First of all, I have to say this has just been fascinating. I've really enjoyed listening to you.
Thanks, buddy.
Very, very interesting, and I like that expression. I've never heard that before. Hire the will, train the skill. So I love that because I totally get it. But I think that's great. But my question is really, as you were talking about empathy, and then you continued with the framework of the 6 E's, I
Yeah.
started thinking about design thinking and how that fits in with what you're talking about. And I was wondering if you could share some of your thoughts about that.
I love that. Thanks, Patty, and thanks for the kind words. Yeah, I think yeah, I am no expert in design thinking, but what I do know about design thinking, or what's called human-centered design, right, is it's really the same. It's really very similar in terms of you got to start with that empathy. You got to start with that deep understanding of the customer's whole life. And I think what we don't do enough of is deep understanding of an employee's whole life, how work fits into that. And so I think this looks a lot like design thinking, and it can look a lot like design thinking also in terms of iteration, which is we heard these things from employees. Now let's try some things. Let's make some changes. Let's try them. Let's pilot them, and let's see how it goes. I go back to the example that I gave from the South African telecom company. They actually started up this program with no budget, no campaign. They just sort of said, like, would you be willing to help us solve these problems? And then they started to get all this involvement and all this input, and then it sort of became a thing that got built along the way, but it was iterative. And I think that's a very human-centered design kind of approach to things. So I'm a huge fan of design thinking. I think when done right and when enabled properly, it can be really powerful. And I think turning the lens that we often put on the customer onto the employee is a big part of that. And to be honest, Patty, just I think these labels that we put on people, like customer and employee, can themselves be really limiting and kind of dehumanizing, and even sometimes infantilizing, right? Where we start to just not treat people as whole humans. And so I think that perspective of saying, how can I help my fellow humans, as opposed to employees or customers, we are all both. And so that design thinking approach is exactly what I mean when I talk about human centric culture. Thanks for that, Betty.
Excellent. So we have another question here from Carl. Carl, come on up.
Oh, not this guy.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh no, trust me, it's fine. No, it's probably more of a comment rather than the question here, because when you were describing the 6 E's, I was kind of imagining the ad car change model, which I'm sure you're familiar
Yep.
with, and it seemed like it was very integral with that, because there are the change models out there, and in the courses that I do, we talk about ad car. We used to talk about Cotter's 8 steps, but I've kind of switched over to ad car because simpler, more easily remembered, and
Yes.
fundamentally more personalized approach to change, because it really starts with the individual. So from that perspective, how do you see those two, your 6 E's and ADKAR, really meshing and integrating?
Oh man, thank you for asking that and for noticing that, Carl. Hugely influenced by the AdCar model. I'm a big ProSci fan, and have good friends at that organization. And I think that the AdCar model, which has endured now for almost 30 years, yeah, as you say, so easy to grasp. Not always easy to do, right? But it's those best principles, as I like to say, of managing change. So I think there's a lot that's in common with it. I think the way that they diverge a little bit is I don't see in AdCar a lot of time spent on really understanding the humans who you're trying to get to change. And I think that's one way in which the 6 E's is kind of additive to AdCar, which is, let's really spend some time understanding these folks, and where they're coming from, and not just with regard to this change that we want to make them do, but with respect to their whole lives, and how this fits in.
Yeah, because I think you're right. The ad car seems like a lot of times I hear the application of ad cars, we're still doing this to folks. We're trying to get them to do something. I mean, the COVID-19 was a perfect example of ad car in right there in action, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
it's a more immediate change that we had to deal with, not this kind of long-term change that involves tons of people and emotions, and where empathy really comes into play. So yeah.
I love that, Carl, and I think you bring up something really important too, which is I think that COVID-19 was also an experience that we all went through that made us realize just the fact that organizations don't exist without all the humans that they comprise, and that there are individual needs that have to be met, right? And we're looking at this now with the shift to whether it's return to office or whether it's hybrid work or what have you, where organizations are going, can we have a blanket policy? Or do we need to look at each individual because, Eryc lives with his 89-year-old mother-in-law and she's more vulnerable. And Stephanie has, a kid to look after, whatever all these things are, and so I think that's another big part of it, which is that I think ADCAR, and again, I'm a huge fan, and I don't think this was the intent of ADCAR, but I think we end up in practice looking at sort of homogenous groups of people as opposed to individual experiences.
Right. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, hey, this has been super. Patty, you want to come back on another question? Bring it on up.
Yeah, I do have another question to ask you, because that's going back to looking at these 6 steps. What I'm wondering is how you take leaders and how you help them see that, understanding the theory behind this is one thing, but actually putting it into action is another thing. And that's where, I work as a consultant as well. And that's kind of the hardest part of the job, is how do you take what you're telling them and then get them to actually do it? So I was wondering how you do that, and how you really get leaders to embrace this, and how you get them to really take this into action and put it at the heart of what it is they do.
Gosh, it's such a great and hard question, Patty. I love that. And I think that the truth is, like, I both philosophically and sort of constitutionally, I don't believe in getting people to do anything. But I take your point, which is how do you actually make this change real? And one of the things that I've found helpful just in my own experience, and I'm sure others have other experiences to share, but in my own experience, talking to leaders, I like to find leaders who actually already begin with some sort of bias toward the human experience. So if it's a leader who says, look, I'm trying to improve the customer experience, or we've been doing these employee opinion surveys for years and we're not making any headway on employee perceptions of working here, or whatever, or I've got a turnover problem, or whatever it is. So I like to start there where they're open and receptive. But then I use actually a pretty quantitative approach to kind of diagnosis. So I use a system of assessments some folks may be familiar with, called from Human-Centric. And so I use their assessments to really help the leaders see not just here's what your culture is, but here's the outcomes that your culture is getting. And how could those be better? Because that's what you should care about anyway, right? Is what are the results we're getting? That's what a CEO wants to know about. So starting from the outcomes and working backward into culture, and then what's creating that culture, which is the things we can actually change. So to me, it starts with, again, just somebody who's actually open to a human-centered conversation to begin with, and then giving them a sort of a data-driven way of thinking about this stuff rather than a soft way. And I'm pretty soft, by the way.
Excellent. This has been great. Excellent content. I think we've got everyone's learned a lot here about how to do treating employees as humans. I think that's bottom line, and we are all just people serving people. That's really what it comes down to. Thank you so much, Eryc. This has been wonderful. Absolutely. What we're going to do next is we're going to go into breakout sessions. If you're watching the recording, you should join us sometime because you never know who you're going to meet. I also just want to put a plug in that we are going to be in person with our executive summits coming this fall. Boston in September, Chicago in October, Atlanta in November, Austin in December, Anaheim in January, and Orlando in February. So if you're interested in participating in any way as a speaker, as a advisory board member, as just a participant, get in touch. You can find us at cxtalks.org. There's more information there about being a speaker and being a sponsor and getting involved. Thank you again, everyone. This is Mark Michelson signing out from CX Forums Connects Live. Join us again every Wednesday.